Hello, everybody. Hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome to another show of On Tilt, the state of Black policing and mental health in America. Thank you for joining us today. We got a very exciting show today. We're going to be speaking to an Asian American activist, Jenna Chung. Make sure I said her name right. A dynamic woman. We're excited to have her on the show. Julius will not be with us today. He has some other engagements to attend to. So we are wishing him well. And we, of course, I miss him. I feel like my other half is not here. And, I'm like a little bit like, oh my God, I'm a little nervous. But again, you all have listened to me enough out there, on various platforms. So I think you're confident. I'm confident. We got this. But before we start any show, we always start the show with a moment of silence. And in our moment of silence, let's remember, the families right now who are enduring the George Floyd trial. And let's pray for justice, because guess what? They better get this right. So let's pray for that. Let's pray for the families at the U.S. Capitol who lost their lives when someone, ran into them, ran them down, ran into them, killed a couple of officers. So let's pray for that family as well. Let's pray for, I know I have to go to a funeral on Monday for a mom who lost her son. And, that always touches me because I never want another mother to experience what I experienced. So, I have a lot during this moment of silence that I'm going to be reflective on. And whatever is on your list, let's just take this time right now. Let's reflect. Let's mention their names in our spirit. Let's send love and support and great energy. Let's just be together and of one voice right now. Welcome back. Welcome back. I'm just excited to bring our guests on. Miss Jenna Chung, she is an amazing mother. She has so many wonderful stories to share about the work she has done as an activist, supporting the Black Lives Matter movements. Her activism stretches back to Penn State when she was a student there. So she's not a stranger to raising the fist. And, other mothers, other people, other organizations in one accord, in solidarity, to raise awareness to the injustices that are going on in our community. So I'm excited to share the platform with her today. She's a Asian American, and so we get to get, a little different perspective on what it's like, especially right now in this radical period where we're even finding that Asian Americans have recently been coming under attack and having to fight for, their justice and their civil rights and, against racial biases, that has been blatantly done against them because of this whole COVID era. But also there are subliminal messages that has always, especially Asian American women, have always been the elephant in the room, meaning that they have associated Asian American women a lot of times with the whole sex trade and sexual abuse and sexual meanings. So without any ado, let's bring Jenna to the show. Let's welcome her. Hi, Jenna.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to join you. Really feel blessed for this opportunity. It's really humbling to be able to share my perspective. I'm only one person, and it is entirely possible that every Asian out there disagrees with me. But, it is a separate experience to walk around with this skin, just as I respect that, walking around in your skin has impacted your life every day. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much.
Absolutely. Oh, well, look, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you want us to know about you? And tell us about a mom. What's your passion? Like, who is Jenna Chung?
Well, listen, so I'm a middle-aged mom of two young kids. They are, almost 4 and 6 years old. And I grew up in Pittsburgh in the suburbs. I grew up, and, one of the things about growing up Asian American is I've just now realized that we're raised with privilege. And I mean, obviously I've known that, but that ultimately, we really do benefit from systemic racism. But meanwhile, we grow up our whole lives experiencing interpersonal racism and prejudice. Now that I'm a mom, it's really put things in a different light now that I'm here in Pittsburgh and raising my kids, and really distinctly, visually, and every day. I live in Wilkinsburg, but I live on the white side of Wilkinsburg. And, Pittsburgh is so segregated. And if things don't change here in Pittsburgh and in cities across the country and in small towns across the country, then my kids are going to grow up the same way I did, which is we spend intentionally half of our time in white groups, and we are the other. And we spend lots of time with our Black friends in our neighborhoods and our communities, but we're still the other. And if things don't change and until everyone is integrated and Pittsburgh really desegregates truly, we're always going to be the other, trying to figure out how we can fit in, but never really fitting. If everybody and all, I really love when we see the kids all coming together. That's, for me, it's selfish. It is selfish, but on the outside as an activist, it's always about my, Black neighbors, brothers and sisters, and really making sure that their voice is heard. But, when I look down the long haul, this is really for me and my family and my children, because we need our Black friends and friends, to be represented everywhere, to be welcome everywhere, to be safe walking through any grocery store or convenience store, so that we can all, so that things can be different for my kids and that they're not fighting these same fights that we're fighting now.
Yeah, it's a little bit. It's when you mention other, I'll admit, as an African American woman, we always felt like we were the other. We didn't think another racial group or another, racial group, cultural, ethnic background. We never thought that you all would consider yourselves as the other. We always just thought it was just us. So just hearing you say that, did you actually feel like you were the other when you came around your Black friends, or when you were around your white friends? Did you feel like, we felt we were the other? Did you feel that?
Yeah. Growing up in the suburbs, you get a lot of, it's confusing because I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And at that time, it was, people, well-meaning folks, often my closest friends often said, I just think of you as like you're white. You're just like us. And it was very confusing because Asian parents do not bring up racism with their kids the way that Black families have to talk about this, because it's a matter of safety, and you have to understand that unfortunately you got to strive that much harder just to get noticed. But for Asians, we don't, our parents don't really think about that, because we don't experience systemic racism where it endangers us or prevents us from, receiving a loan or a scholarship or, any of that systemic kind of stuff. So we don't really talk about it very much. So, it really, there's that hole there. And I think that second generation parents are, my generation, I'm hoping that people are more aware and are talking to their kids about it, because we're still going to be walking around with this skin.
Yeah. So what is it like to be an Asian American activist in the Black Lives Matter movement? Because I see you've been at several of my actions, if not all of them. You stood by me and held signs and brought the kids to send me pictures when I was, at Duquesne, and when I was at, conducting marches. You always look up and you're there. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity to finally sit down with you and ask you, what did it feel like, being a part of that movement as an Asian American woman? And, it's kind of like, now you're also, I saw you at University of Pitt, and this time it was standing up for your race and culture, but we'll get to that. The first part, what is it, how did it feel for you to stand up? What is your thoughts on, the Black Lives Movement and why you chose to be so supportive of that movement?
Well, as I have personal experiences from when I first became active and started learning about social justice and injustice 20 years ago when I was a college student. I went through an experience where my friends were put in danger by police when we were really just trying to drive home. And I saw that firsthand, the Black Lives Matter the actual danger of police just drawing guns on Black college. I mean, we were all college students. It was a group of scholars. And so that is of, the urgency is what really puts me out there on the streets and gets me whenever I have time and my kids aren't with me or whatever. The urgency to be there and to be there with you and to be standing alongside. Now, when George Floyd happened last year, and we know that we had Officer Toy who was there, and that really hits hard to know that one of the 4 officers who was idly standing by and watching one of our fellow citizens, lose his life for a long 9 minutes. That really, really, feel it angers me. I will be frank, it angers me because as an Asian American, it's been a long time that I've been looking around, and every time I go to marches, I am looking for other faces that look like me. And I do feel like this is a part of our responsibility. If we're going to stand up against racism, if we believe that we deserve not to be discriminated against, then just as equally, we need to be standing against that for everyone else. And where are they, right? And there are plenty of very strong allies here in Pittsburgh. So it's tricky because when we're out there, so first of all, with George Floyd, Asian silence is violence. And that, again, as it has come back around, and to me, our as a community, the Asian American community, not being a vocal presence in the BLM movement last year, again, plenty of wonderful individuals, but they're not being an Asian American community presence representing in BLM, in my opinion, contributed greatly to the escalation and the enablement and the, of racism in general, because we didn't take, as strong of a stance to stand up and say systemic racism is not okay in the schools, in healthcare, in policing, because we did not stand up strong enough. Lots of racists were looking around like, they don't care. They don't care. Okay, well, we're not afraid of them. We can start beating on them too. And so it has come around. And so being an Asian in the Black Lives Matter movement, to an extent, I'm looking around a lot, and I am I don't have a strong Asian group of friends, I am friends with all folks, but I don't have a strong group of Asian friends, and I don't have a strong affinity and, active lifestyle with the Asian community. But where are we, right? And so maybe that's on me, maybe if I took time to reconnect, that does push me and interest me in connecting more with my Asian community so that I can be more connected and be more, be a part of it in that way. But that's kind of the first thing that I see. But the second thing is, it's kind of weird because we're not white, right? We are definitely allies, but we do understand racism in a way that white folks can't. Doesn't mean that all Asians really process racism the same way. A lot of us are okay with, getting better scholarships and benefiting systemically from, easier to get loans or whatever. We're okay with that. But it's time for us not to be okay with systemic racism, because it's enabling interpersonal racism. It's getting dangerous. And, a lot of people say, you're going to go out to the Asians. What do they do? I mean, they're just like, they're just nice and quiet. We're not that quiet.
Yes, we do think you're very quiet. That's why when we see you out there with a fist raised, we like, what?
That's right. And that's true. I know Asians, we are not that quiet. And I think that we see a lot of the younger generation, a lot of the college students are out there, and a lot of the young adults are out there, but a lot of, parents and the older generation. And as we know, there's a lot of that older generation has those old stigmas. We have that conflict between the Black community and the Asian community, that, the generation that was in Vietnam, that was in Korea. There's a lot, and the LA riots in the 90s. I mean, this stuff is historical, and there's reasons that Asians, previously did not support, and that Blacks have had, taken issue with Asian members in their community, and, that kind of stuff. But, we're all, we all got to come together, because racism is racism. And I guarantee you, somebody coming and pushing me and calling me a racist epithet, guarantee you they're racist against Black folks too, okay? So we're not going to stand by and say, oh, it's just us. We have to wield our privilege. We have privilege, and we got to wield it.
One thing you said to me the other day, you said, Black Lives Matter. If it's important that everyone recognize Black Lives Matter before we recognize any other, lives or any other, issues. I don't know. I forgot how you said it, but it was very poignant. What did you say?
Here's what I said. I think this is what you're talking about, is that when this recent violence against Asians just started really coming down, and we all came out with Stop Asian Hate, and saying, I like to say Asians belong here. Okay. But when we came out with that, it wasn't the same. When Black Lives Matter came out, right? They said, all lives matter. And they said, blue lives matter. Right. And it was about denying that right, and saying, no, but this is how the system works. This is how the system works. No, you can't change the system. But when we say it, we, even in peril, even as we're being shot down, literally, we still ride with the privilege that nobody's coming at us and saying, no, it's not just Asians. Nobody is coming at us and trying to deny us or standing up for ourselves. And that's where the systemic nature of the Black Lives Matter movement, is it's crushing for people to say, you're telling us that how we've been doing this, how we've been policing for 100, 200 years, how we've been, doing real estate for 200 years, that this is wrong. No, we're all in this together. No. And that is a privilege that we wield, and that we have to admit that, and we got to use it to our benefit, because our voices are heard differently. They resonate differently on those very same ears that turn deaf, for certain voices.
Well, what are some of the stereotypes that is associated with being an Asian American here in in this time of movement, period, in the whole atmosphere of, people using this time to stand up and advocate and vocal, how does the stereotypes that are a lot of times associated with being an Asian, American, how does that come into play for activism in the work? Like, what are some of those stereotypes that you all find is attached to you, and how do you have to kind of work through them in your activism work?
I think that generally societally, that we're quiet, we're obedient, we're nerdy, good at math, and some of those positive stereotypes, that model minority stuff, that definitely can damage you. I definitely spent a good part of my adolescence trying to prove that I was not a nerd, rather than trying to reach my best, my best capacity. But, when it comes to within the movement, I think that it helps that there were so many white allies out there vocal this year, because that also, just in general, as an ally, gives you credence and gives you confidence. But I think that there is some looking around and feeling, and feeling like, how strong is my voice as a minority and as an ally, and trying to find that balance. And I think that, it's tricky, because there are times when I don't fit into, I'm not comfortable in some conversations where it's just a bunch of white allies. And I'm like, okay, I feel a burden of responsibility to participate in a certain way. But at the same time, there are definitely plenty of, Black leadership and, Black spaces where I say, that's for you guys to deal with your own issues, and give respect to that.
So a couple of them that come to mind is the whole association with massage parlors and that, when it comes to sexual pleasures for hire or paid, usually that's something that they would associate with the Asian American culture when it comes to these massage parlors, and what's the famous word, happy ending. And then also, just thinking about, economically, you also are looked at as being rich, almost, as business owners, and your place on a platform, a platform that's, kind of sits above a lot of other cultural groups.
And it's hard to live up to.
Yeah.
But listen, for me, when I look at, that the stereotype of, being business owners, for example, when we look at business owners, and for me, being a teenager in the 90s, ultimately, that's kind of what, the conflict in my mind boiled down to, was a lot of Korean business owners in Black neighborhoods. And now that I'm an adult and I'm looking back at it, and systemic racism, the reason that those Korean business owners were enabled to open businesses there was systemic racism, where we benefited, okay? But again, it comes down to, it does not mean that those individuals were racist against the Black neighborhoods that they served and that they, right? But and the rage that came from the Black community on why that conflict and that stereotype, it wasn't just a stereotype. They were seeing that it came from real life, right? That was in a lot of Black neighborhoods in LA. And
yeah, because there was a lot of conflict. We would have a lot of Asian businesses, liquor stores, carryouts, supermarkets, in the Black neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And it's almost weird because for the most part, we coexisted, but there was marked points of conflict in which, there was racial tension between you all and the Black community, mm-hmm. And not to deviate too far off from our subject, but, it's how do you, and now, what's going on now, there's violence. It seemed like on the rise against the Asian American community. And would you say that's solely COVID, or it kind of already existed, but is now in this time, everything is surfacing and coming out?
Yeah, I think that is, as I said, every generation, in the 90s, we had the LA conflicts and the LA riots. And in the 70s, we had Vietnam, setting up these stereotypes. And again, as I said, for myself as a BLM activist and looking back historically and knowing a little bit better now than I did when I was a teenager, I look back and I say that the rage of the Black community members was warranted, and it was established because of systemic racism and them not being enabled, them being disabled from opening those businesses in their own neighborhoods, which should be their right? And that's, we need reparations so that those systems can be broken. And so their rage was, coming from a correct place. Now, the individuals in the Korean community who were going in and opening up businesses where businesses needed to be open, they were not at that time, they were not getting and thinking about this stuff. It is 30 years later, and business owners now who are in those neighborhoods need to be recognizing and thinking about, okay, I need to make sure that I'm hiring Black, high school students to work in my store because this is I have had this store in this neighborhood for 20 years. I need to be really a part of this neighborhood. And, so now that there is more awareness, and at the same time, folks who grew up with these experiences from the 70s, from the 90s, this is the only time I have never, during my time in the BLM movement, ever felt it was appropriate for me to step to the people that I walk alongside and behind to say, I do challenge you to go back to your communities and remind your aunties and uncles and your cousins when they make that joke that that's not funny, and that it does come from historical, right? It was funny in 1998. It's not funny today. And so that's basically, I have more of a respect for where the conflict came from. And we can't hate on that conflict existing. That conflict between the Korean community and the Black community came from white supremacy. It was born out of systemic racism that held the Blacks down. And, the Asians unknowingly took advantage, and we benefited from it. Now that we know this, we need to step back and, shop owners, business owners.
They unknowingly. I don't know. I think true. That I have to, kind of disagree with that. I think that when you are aware of your privileges, you take advantage of them. And partly to take advantage of them, you have to be fully in the know of what you're doing and the environment. Like, I believe for, both Caucasians and the Asian community knew that they can get lending, and they can get properties in areas where they didn't have to, like you said, the benefits. Whereas, we could have the same, financial ability to acquire these properties, but we were denied. So
here's where white supremacy pitted us against you, is that those business owners, they were led to believe, well, those, right? I do not believe this, but they were led to believe, well, they're just too lazy. They're not opening up shops in their neighborhood because they're not working hard for it. And they think, and that's what privileged folks are led to believe, right? When actually it's systemic. Why is, only 2% of loans awarded to black, business owners when 13% of the population is Black? Why is that? That doesn't make sense. Is there fewer people trying, or are there more barriers implemented into the system and, qualifications that are systemically designed to prevent them from opening businesses, from getting loans, from getting a property, from, becoming a landlord, from owning property, all that stuff. And so that's why I say, like, I think they knew, but I don't think they were actually aware of that. I think that there was the systemic racism was taught to us in such a manner that, to an extent, people were led to believe, I'm really just working harder. And that's not so. Yeah.
And that's why I say it's some truth to what you're saying too, because some of these systems we adopted, just through being raised in it, those norms. And so I think what's powerful about what happened last year and this whole COVID is it sat many of us down to really look at our environment and how we interacted as people. And then, so we weren't doing a whole lot of movement, which forced us to look at, taking consideration what's happening in other parts of the country. And our eyes, even, we tend to think it was just happening in our own little community, but our eyes was open, when we saw the Breonna Tellers and we saw the George Floyds and we saw, Botham Jean eating cereal at his dinner table, Ahmaud Arbery running in the neighborhood. It was like one after another incident. And so now, because we're not at the restaurants, we're not at, the sports stadium, we're not moving around. So right now, the TV becomes our main entertainment. And we're like, what? And then what other activity is there but to come together and to stand and say, we don't tolerate this. We have a voice. We're just not sitting at home and, we're just not these professionals. We're not just these college students. We're not just a mom. We're not just a dad. We're raising children, conscious-minded children. And we have lenses. We're seeing this happening before us, and it's not okay. And so I think enough of us collectively said no. And that's, again, is what we describe the movement, no matter what it looks like, there was enough of us that said change is not comfortable, but it's necessary. And we took to the streets and did something about it. And which brings me to the whole COVID, you had the former president introduce almost this whole, some would say, the beginning of national presence of Asian violence was lit by his commentary about where this whole COVID virus came from, and at the White House having that meeting on the lawn and insulting that Asian American woman by insulting the fact that pretty much she could possibly not be an Asian American and be responsible for COVID being here in the United States. An Asian American. An American. And yet he single-handedly made this whole COVID all about your race. And thus came the very public violence.
When you look at, just the whole scope of racism over the whole year, and, the former president really escalating racism over the past 5 years. And, I honestly think that the violence against Asians should really simply serve as a wake-up call, because all along, this is, it has been about racism, broad racism with a capital R against everyone. But everyone has been so focused on denying the Black systemic racism that, that you can't do that. You can't pretend, that Black systemic racism is one small thing that doesn't exist. It is one aspect of everything. All right. But ultimately, the reason that we cannot deny the Black Lives Matter movement and the movement to end systemic racism, which specifically impacts Black folks, is because it is in every single system that we have. So no matter what industry you work in, that is a system. If you work in transportation, if you work in, healthcare, if you work in shoes, if you work in fashion, every industry. And what that means is that no matter what the system is, almost every single system is designed to make it harder for Black people to succeed and excel. And so until, we accept that and put that in the forefront, then, I mean, if we even just look at policing and we look at Black Lives Matter and police shooting citizens without a fair trial, without them getting, one of the things that I've been swallowing and I have been telling people and challenging people and asking them is, I definitely realized the first 19 years of my life before I decided to actively become an anti-racist, I definitely was made to feel like it's inherent. It's a feeling that if I heard on the news that a Black man had been shot by the police, that I would feel safer. That was how in the 80s, without thinking about, oh, who was it? What happened?
That's powerful right there.
Okay. And I don't remember any specific time somebody saying, oh, the world is a safer place now. But that was a feeling, an inherent feeling, without hearing details about how it happened. I didn't care. Just as a little girl, that's what I would hear. And that is inherent, right?
I'm sorry, I had to put a pin in that one right there. I've never heard anyone say that before. That watching and seeing Black people killed or arrested, because a lot of times, we make the news for that alone. The fact that we're, when people get arrested, they tell the whole history. So-and-so was on drugs, even though it didn't have anything to do with the crime. They always interview the person that was not always well spoken on camera. And so, so the stereotype and the images, in the media of us, but I never really, even though it makes sense, I didn't consider the fact that every time they would spend media coverage showing us in that light, that it was communicating to other racial cultures that they were safe. And maybe, just maybe, when a police pulls someone over, in their head, they're saying, we're not going to give this person due justice or their rights. What we're going to do is go along with the narrative. And that is, if we snuff you out, the world is going to be, the community is going to be safe. Trayvon Martin.
Because you just existing is a threat.
Right. Trayvon Martin walking in the neighborhood eating Skittles with a hoodie on, innocent as can be. And yet Zimmerman thought that he was a threat and that his little neighborhood would be safe, that he patrols if I take unarmed Trayvon Martin out. Ahmaud Arbery running in a neighborhood. Just stop to look at the construction on a house. Maybe he was dreaming of one day building a house himself, running through a neighborhood. If we take him out, our neighbors would be safe. How sickening is that?
And listen, that's a hard truth that I've been spitting that out because I think that hits me in my chest. And I think a lot of us were really not intentionally, but systemically raised to just feel without thinking about that is a real person's life. Maybe he was innocent. Maybe, we were raised with that assumption that the police are good and the police are doing good. But now we realize, so when we say last year they shot and killed over 1,000 1,000 people. I don't know if they're who was citizens and whatnot, right? 1,020 some. And we know that people always say they killed more white people than black people, right? We know it's about the population and the disproportionate murder and, shooting and killing of, untried people just being murdered for being suspicious or for a police officer being afraid, right? But, people need to realize if we address this Black Lives Matter, Black people being disproportionately shot and killed by the police, what will happen is all lives will matter because we're going to look at the other 600 people that were also shot and killed by the police. Not, if we address and we say this is not okay, that the Black lives are being shot disproportionately, then regardless, once we value those lives entirely, then we are going to be looking at that whole system of why is anybody getting shot? But first, we got to look at why are 2-3 times more Black people getting shot and killed by police. That is not their job, and that is not a job title. Does not give you a license to do it.
I'm going to sit here and say, as much as news I've watched, and I could be wrong because I haven't seen everything that's been publicized, but I don't think I ever seen an Asian shot and killed by the police.
Well, Christian Hall actually was just unfortunately, Christian Hall, the end of December. I think it was in New Jersey or something, and again, he's just one among, why is the whole entire system, why is it going to come out that police officer is going to use his union and going to keep his job, but ultimately, when Black folks are shot at regularly, that is the ultimate problem, because that enables the system of violence and the culture of violence within the police system, the entire system and the way it's set up. Protect and serve, right? Protect and serve. Does that really make you think of hurting people when that is right now the current, that's what we all think of when we think of police.
Are you for reform or defunding?
Well, in my mind, they are the same. Defunding the police is the entire system has to be redone. We can't, you can't reform it. I do believe that there is an aspect of violent crime protection that we do need. Yes, like SWAT teams. SWAT teams. We know they're going to go in and. Right. But that's expected.
They can be a mental health SWAT team too.
Exactly. Right. So the majority of what the police deal with doesn't need to be dealt with violently and would not end up going violently if we had things just reform, if it was restructured. But I do believe that a part of the restructuring, maybe 10%, would be serious violent, I'm not saying that nobody is going to, need to enforce, but 90% of what the police deal with, you really do not need a gun, and you really do not need 8 police officers and 3 vehicles for a traffic ticket.
I want to read some of these comments in our chat, but after that, I want to talk about being a mom and raising, racial conscience, activism, freedom fighters, because you always have them with you at these protests. And so I want to know, what is happening at your dinner table, when you're having conversations with them, and what does that look like, taking a peek into another cultural world, and seeing how you navigate that with your own children. But okay, so Daisy, she says that's truth. This is from an earlier comment. She says Black lives are the most marginalized. Our liberation is your liberation.
Mm-hmm.
So she was saying, in agreement with you from what you said earlier, our liberation helps put the light on other, cultures and their liberation. But we got to get us right first, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Charlotte's son, I'm taking with the last name Son. She may be an Asian American. She says, let's look at how we are divided and categorized by an application based on race, religion, and gender. If we all can stick together, we can get further, and acknowledge that Blacks are at the bottom of the food chain. That's interesting with the application process. I guess for statistic purposes, it has its benefits, when it comes to really researching and seeing what, various groups are getting, what, resources, or, where they tend to, reside, and, it's some benefits there. But, it also plays a huge role in supporting, racist motivations, and so, gathering that type of information, it may make some people go to the Black community and say, you know what, even though this product is unhealthy, they'll buy it. And I'm going to get rich off of them by marketing it into that Black community.
Well, I think we're, in terms of I worked as a college admissions advisor, counselor. And so that's an example where, you're really leaving it up to the receiver of the application to decide how they're going to apply those. For me, I was always looking for a diverse panel of students, and that if I felt like, I want to attract more Black students from New York, so I need to go through the applications, haven't seen everybody's face, and I'm going to, who in here looks like a promising student that I can, I'm not giving them anything that they haven't deserved, but I'm going to give them an extra call to tell them a little bit more about our dining hall so that they can be a little bit more excited about sports, and putting in that personal effort and that's reparations. Right? Is in our everyday job, whatever job you have, instilling reparations and using personal. I'm not going to give that student an extra scholarship, but on an interpersonal level, I can provide reparations by saying, I want to make sure that my Black applicants to this college get the personal attention that they deserve, because I know that when their mamas 30 years ago applied to college, they didn't get this attention. And now it's 2018, it's 2020, they deserve this attention. And I, as a human, I can do this because I know that their going to college matters.
Yeah. So, we don't have that much time left. I do want to hear about your child rearing.
I love this. And I personally, it really empowers me as an activist. And it also really helps me when you put things into terms that a child is going to understand. It sometimes really hits you in your core. And so with my kids, and it helps you to get comfortable with talking about things. So a couple of things that we do is we do go to actions, and they're not always safe. So I don't keep them at any action more than 2 hours, because police violence is going to come always. It'll be more than 2 hours, usually after 3 hours, if something like that's going to happen. You just got to be aware of some of that stuff and which neighborhoods, and I always make sure, and everybody's really supportive of that. And we make our own signs, and the kids make signs, and we talk about it. So art is teaching, and art is real life. And we talk about, so when we talk about it's important to me. You know, we live in Wilkinsburg, we have Black friends. And when Antoine Rose was shot and killed, my daughter was 1 year old, and it really broke me on a more personal level because I was a mom. And I recognized that if this happened in 15 years, we live in Wilkinsburg, we're not that far from Braddock. Like, she probably would have known someone who knew him, you know, and that breaks my heart. If this is still happening, then well, it can't be the same. So, so for me, I said, you know, I know that your Black friends are hearing about their safety from this young age. What can I do? I do not give them details about violence. They don't see pictures of police violence, but I tell them in very simple terms, you know, this police officer, you know, he hurt George Floyd, he hurt him until he died. And man, when you say it like that, it's true. He hurt him and he wouldn't stop hurting him until he died. And, you know, the kids get that. They understand what it means that, you know, to hear about kids in cages, that hurts them. And, you know, because we are not Black, I know that the police are safe for them to go to when they're in trouble. And so it's dichotomous because I want to teach them, if we're out at a music festival, you're at a park and you can't find mom, you go to people with uniforms. All right. But here's how I teach them to be advocates for Black lives, is that they know if they're with our Black or brown friends, you need to be the one to talk to the police officer. And that Rosie has known this since she was 3 years old. If you're with Josh, you're with you're with one of your Black friends, you need to be the one to go and talk to the police officer, and you need to be bold and don't be nervous, okay? And you know, and you need to be the one to approach because you need to stand with your friend. And because she understands that it is just a little bit more dangerous for her Black boy, young friend, even at the age of 7, 8, 10, that it is safer for her to approach a police officer. And so that's one way that we teach them at this age that they can advocate, is that they should kind of be in between their Black friends and police officers, but that for them, and they know this explicitly, because we have light skin, police officers are, you know, they will help you find mom, you know, that kind of a thing. It's tricky.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's very tricky because, you know, we want to be able to teach our young Black boys and girls to be self-advocates. They're intelligent. We sent them to school. They should be able to have a voice and be able to speak for themselves, you know, but unfortunately we see both sides. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, just listening to you, and I'm saying, because it's a double-edged sword. If you have, you know, your white friends speak on your behalf, what symbolical messages are you giving to, you know, that Black child that has to stand there and witness that, and then internalize it and say, I really don't have a voice at a young age. Yeah. So if I could reimagine that scenario.
Yeah.
How about everybody together approach that officer and stand in solidarity, allow the Black person, the Black young man, the Black young woman to naturally and freely be able to have a voice. But it's going to be hard when they're together, because whether the Caucasian or the Asian or any other race opens their mouth, if that Black young man is targeted, he's targeted. Mm-hmm. You know, unfortunately, that's the environment we live in. However,
for bringing that up, you know, because you're right. I don't want to teach my kids to be standing in the way of their friends speaking for themselves. And I'm really glad you brought that up. And, you know, and I'm always open to these, you know, learning and thinking about this, because
That's why we got this show.
Exactly. And that's what, this is something that for everybody out there, people can come to me and say, but what about this? What about her friend deserves to have his voice? And that's something that I wasn't thinking about, right? My first and foremost thought is, I don't want them, it's tough. That is a double-edged sword. And I think the most important thing is we're talking to our kids about it, so they're aware that dichotomy is there. I mean, they don't know the word dichotomy.
Be flexible. There's no right and wrong in any of this. In our lives, we have to be always on point. Like, we have to be so fluid and so liquid that we have to change real quickly depending on the circumstance that we find ourselves in. And so my resolve is we should just always be flexible, and very sensitive to where we are at that particular time, understanding no one rule fits the next. That's why you got to stay very flexible and very, aware and woke. That's why we use that word woke. You got to be present in the situation. And so, but yeah, I love that the fact is hate is taught at home, and so the fact when I hear other cultures speaking about Black Lives Matter and now even the violence that's happening in their own culture, your culture, those are conversations that are being had with our young tomorrows, our young leaders, and I just, the good thing that came out of all the violence we've seen on TV against, and the injustices that has surfaced around the world. We watching things happen. People can't even protest and getting killed and beaten around the world as we speak. So, the good thing about all of this is it opens the door for us to take that information, share it talk about it in our communities, talk about it in our churches, talk about it with our children, talk about it with our families, because we all got racist people in our families.
That's right.
That's opening up the communication. We're getting ready to.
Let me tell you just let me spit out a couple of things.
Give you the last word. Go ahead.
Everyday life, all right? Take your children to libraries in neighborhoods where you can make friends that don't look like you and go to story time. Online, you can go to virtual story times with friendly Black faces, all right? Books, there's the Equal Opportunity, a subscription book box. There's imagination books. And so filling your library with as diverse of a population in your stories and all your books, shows that you watch, and actively going out and making sure you participate in communities and don't feel shy. If you feel weird because you feel like you don't belong, remember, those people come to your community and feel like they don't belong all the time. So put yourself out there, be the only Asian, be the only white person in a Black story time, and join and make friends. Now is the time to say, and it is okay to be vocal and say, I came here because we want to make more diverse friends. And hi, I'm Jenna. Nice to meet you. Speak up and, don't be afraid to be vocal and don't be afraid to mess up. All right. Surround yourself with people who will call you and encourage you to think about what about, empowering your child's Black friend. Encourage people and be willing to step back when people say, okay, and say, okay, let's think about it and let's talk about it. Let's unlearn and let's put it back out there. So the kids are the future. This is it. Look how cute.
I had to, when your children have given me so many artwork, and I love artwork. I had to pull out Jaylen's artwork, because as you were speaking, as you was talking, Jenna, I wanted to also say, take your kids with you. Take them to protests, take them to rallies, expose them, not only talk about it in at home, but bring them with you. A lot of these protests are very peaceful, very peaceful. So don't be afraid to take your children out with you and participate in such activities.
And let them see that how many other people are loudly shouting that Black Lives Matter. Let them see that. And then they know that they don't stand alone and that it's important.
Absolutely. And I'm grateful. Thank you. You know, I was like, you was talking, I was thinking about the artwork. I was like, that was, so for those who are joining us, the artwork that I just shown is from my son, Jaylen Brown. He's no longer with us, but he's always with us. He's my angel. Her children talks about my son, and her children, Jenna's children, have encouraged me during my hunger strike to stand strong. And they don't ask why I don't eat. They draw pictures for me and they encourage me, because you have done such a great job of explaining to them that my choosing a hunger strike is my First Amendment rights. It is a form of civil protest, a civil rights protest. And I thank you for that. I thank you. That's the greatest compliment I could get from a child, is to say, I am aware of your fight. I might not fully understand it, but I see it. And so I thank you for that.
Well, thank you for, I think it's probably going to be one of the most powerful lessons for them to have met, you know, to know you in their childhood. And, you know, we're not quitting in terms of, we got the USIO and we got things going with the JB's Foundation. So they're not going to quit knowing, but ultimately I believe and know that your fight is not just for what happened to JB, but for what can happen to any student across the country. And that when my kids go to college in 15 years, if they choose to go, that, you know, justice on campuses, just like any other system, justice needs to be served to Black and Brown students and to all students. I know it's not just the Black and Brown students, but like with everything else, we put them and we make sure that they matter, and, you know, everyone else will get justice too.
Yeah, and we're the kids, because they've been quiet.
They're watching a TV show. They're zombified.
Right. They should have came in and said, "Hey."
I know. I told them, if you come running in here, that's okay. But I guess they're happy watching their show.
Thank you for joining us on an On Tilt episode. We really appreciate it. We love you. We love all of you all. Check us out on YouTube later. A lot of our audience join, you know, they'll go online and watch us later, because we come on at like noon, lunchtime, you know, so, you know, sometimes they can't get us.
Thank you to One Hood, and thank you, Dannielle, for, you know, inviting me, but thank you for the opportunity, because I think it's important that, you know, no matter what direction we're coming from, what our background is, everyone needs to be more vocal. Now is the time. I will tell you, when Asian violence happened, you know what I put up on my wall? Black Lives Matter. Because to me, violence coming to Asians is just that we're not loud enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Love you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.